Welcome to Managing Sexuality Intelligently with Stephen Ng, marriage and family therapist. My name is Jason.
My name is Steve.
And we're just two guys hanging out, having a conversation. I'm going to present Steve with a topic that I planned ahead of time and he doesn't know about, and we're just going to talk about that.
Yeah, nothing to worry about there. I mean, it's just sex and nothing I know anything about, so scary. What are we talking about?
Today, we're talking about what sex offenders can teach us.
Wow. That's actually one near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
And, back in the time, the post-Nixonian time of Gerald Ford, his wife, Betty, was an amazing person. And I didn't, at the time, maybe realize how amazing she was. But as the years have gone by since those days, I've really grown to treasure this woman more and more.
That's Gerald Ford's wife?
Yeah, Betty Ford, and of the Betty Ford Treatment Center fame. Mm. And what she did was really counterintuitive to most politicians and their wives, in that after she became aware of and went through whatever hell she went through, having her problems with substance abuse, she outed herself. She gave interviews, she talked about it, and all of a sudden, because one brave woman was willing to talk about her problems, millions of Americans became willing to talk about their problems. Mm-hmm. And that started this cascade of dominoes falling one after the other. And it was in that same time period that, well, this is going to sound self-congratulatory, therapists were making the cover of Time magazine as, these gurus who were going to help people overcome their dysfunctional family histories.
And is that when psychologists first came on the scene?
No, but not by any means, because psychiatry, which was the medical practice of understanding the human mind, that had already come on the scene even before the time of Freud. I mean, mm-hmm. William James here in America, brilliant and still very relevant figure. He was around, but it's been some years since those beginning steps, and psychologists came along, and social workers, and marriage and family therapists, and eventually other professionals and professional categories. And so there's been this burgeoning awareness of the idea that merely living is not enough. We also want to thrive. We don't want to just survive. And people want to be not only married, but happily married. It used to be enough that they were married. Mm-hmm. Now they want to be happy. And what a nightmare that is in the therapy room. And or even they're happy, but not happy enough. Mm-hmm. So there's this rising standard of mental health. And sorrowfully here in 2024, it's, at the same time, we're experiencing an acute need for more psychotherapists, partly because of demographics. We have so many psychotherapists who are coming of an age where they're retiring, and not me, no matter how old I get. But there are a lot of therapists out there who've retired, who started their careers in that first wave of mass education back following the launch of Sputnik and Congress passing this bill that promoted education of therapists because they wanted more scientists and they needed more counselors helping to guide people into getting science educations. So now we're at a bit of a shortage. But getting back to Betty and what she did, it changed everything. And in the same way, when we talk,
and she was struggling with alcohol, correct?
Yeah, alcohol and pills.
Oh, okay.
And but we began to see that alcoholics, what we were then calling alcoholics, we now call them people with alcohol use disorder, which is a mouthful, but I think it's a kinder, more humane way of talking about the problem. We used to call them in the 50s stupid drunks.
Yeah.
And I've been at countless AA meetings where they refer to themselves as just drunks. Mm. And now we're beginning, well, not now, in the 70s and 80s, we started seeing how the alcoholic family was really just one prototype of the dysfunctional family, one genotype, if you will. And I say genotype because, in terms of evolutionary thinking and reproduction, dysfunctional families tend to have dysfunctional kids who then go on to have dysfunctional families of their own. Mm-hmm. And so with psychoeducational awareness, some of us started making changes. I know for me, it was when I hit a critical mass of personal curiosity and pain, I decided to go to Al-Anon, and then from there to adult children of alcoholics meetings. And it was incredibly helpful. And you can't beat the price. They're all free. So these are self-help groups that historically did a far better job helping people with these specific problems than most therapists did.
And why did you first go to Al-Anon?
Oh, I was going to Al-Anon because I grew up in an alcoholic family and because I'm an American. And every American has friends and family who are problem drinkers. So you can't be living in America and not know anybody who has a substance abuse problem. Yeah. So
it's true. I just went back home to Chicago, Illinois, and it's just ingrained in the culture so much of drinking, and it's just what people do out there.
I think it's true of a lot of cultures. And, I have some Nordic blood in my heritage. And I was talking to some other people from that part of the world, and they were saying the same thing, that, that just getting blindingly drunk was a significant part of their culture.
Yeah.
So myself, I like life as it is. I think it's hard enough without impairing myself. And the idea of not being able to think clearly is rather terrifying to me. So, but I was, informed greatly in all of these groups, and they were very effective. Now, getting back to sex offenders, I think sex offenders are to human sexuality what alcoholics were to the dysfunctional family. Mm. So, understanding alcoholism allowed people who figured it out to begin to predict who was at more risk. And with prediction, they could begin to prevent who was at more, prevent people from having problems, or at the very least, prevent more years of suffering until even the most thick-headed among us could figure out, hey, he's got a drinking problem. So there's just been countless years, thousands of years of human suffering prevented by these 12-step programs that have really helped us all in a great way, even if the listeners have never been to a AA meeting or an Al-Anon meeting. Believe me, people who have, and they're the better for it, and we're all better off as a country with those people getting healthier mentally. In the same way, though, sexually, getting back to that is, when somebody commits a sex crime, and after years of study and observation and professional experience, the vast majority of people who commit sex crimes are not criminally minded. They're not quite like the professional bank robber who plans meticulously, or maybe if he's a bad bank robber, he just does it hoping he'll get away with it.
And is there a percentage you could put on that, or is that something?
Yeah, I've surveyed my clients repeatedly over the years, and 85% never had a prior conviction.
Right.
And of the 15% who did, most of those were, when I say conviction, I mean for any crime. And of the 15% who had a conviction for something, it was usually a more serious, like moving violation, like perhaps even a DUI or something like that.
Okay.
Maybe perhaps even something as egregious as misdemeanor or shoplifting. But very few of my clients have any kind of criminal background. Then the other theory would be, oh, well, then they're just perverts. They have clinically significant sexually deviant behaviors known as paraphilias, for those of you who are working on your college prep. And then those paraphilias, would include things like pedophilia, coprophilia, urophilia. And for those who haven't yet mastered Greek and Latin, those are just names we use to describe the naughty bits, what people are aroused by. Really doesn't give us any true insight into treatment. or how we're going to help these individuals. But when you work with this clientele over and over, then you're struck with there is a third diagnostic category that suggests maybe there's a different way to understand them. And that would be what I call the medieval diagnosis, that these men and women have done what they have done because they are evil. They're sinners, they're bad, pretty much like Hester Prynne in The Scarlet Letter, for those of us who are still reading the classics. And she was America's first fictional sex offender. And she wore the Scarlet Letter following her conviction for adultery. And the evidence was, A, she was unmarried, and B, she was pregnant. So obviously she'd been fooling around. And she was punished for that. But a tough cookie, she didn't give up her accomplice. So, and what a great book that was. So I think looking at Hester Prynne, we see the prototype of a typical sex offender in that if we're not careful, the sex offenders we will meet actually can eclipse our morality with their own higher moral standard. And I know that's going to raise some ire in certain quarters, but I have met too many wonderful people who made a significant mistake. Perhaps they were young, perhaps they were impaired because of drinking or drugs or some other reason, perhaps their own history of trauma. But for whatever reason, they committed a sex crime, they were convicted, and by the time I meet them, they've generally served their time. They're generally not on probation. And they've had a chance to reflect and grow, and they're eager to grow typically. They're eager to figure out everything that they can to have a really great life from then on. And listening to their stories has made me a better man, a better husband, a better father. And I think that all of America could benefit from being able to talk about some of these forbidden topics, like, in addition to racism and some of our other horrible problems in this country, like the end of our biome around us because of global warming. We could do better if we could talk about it, because we cannot solve any of our problems if we're unable to look at those problems. And what's really odd, and I've confronted several legislators over this and law enforcement professionals, and very few are interested in the idea of prevention. They like to prevent bank robberies. They'd like to prevent domestic violence. They'd like to prevent a lot of things, but there's this void of thought when it comes to sexual criminality. And what's ironic to me about that is everyone wants to claim that they really care about victims. But I believe it's impossible to say with honesty that you care about victims when you, at the same time, are unwilling to do anything, even have a conversation that could come up with ideas about prevention of victimization. So from my clients, I think understanding them scientifically, and this is going to sound hopelessly libtard of me to say, but with love, because I think love opens the mind to perceiving people as they really are and seeing with compassion. And I think it's very helpful because it is the alternative, of course, is blame and blaming them for their sins. And then, of course, the only response is punishment, and even therapy can be punishing. So if I can understand them, then I can help them not only to prevent future relapses, but I also prevent other people from being harmed by them. And then what is suggested by interviewing hundreds and hundreds of such individuals is, well, why don't we teach our young people differently? Why aren't we teaching one another how to manage our sexuality intelligently so that we're never in a position where we would make these sorts of impaired and hurtful decisions? So I think sex offenders have a lot to teach us. But I think the same thing is true of serial killers. I think serial killers have a lot to teach us. It's just that I think they would have to teach us in an enclosed environment like a prison.
But I feel like even serial killers are more people, or society seems more open to learn about that than sex offenders. If you mention sex offenders, like serial killers, podcasts are super popular, shows are super popular, understanding the mind of them. But then when it comes to sex offenders, it's like people just shut the door.
Yeah, and again, it's a paradox that indicates our collective discomfort with sexuality, in that all sex offenders have to register every time they move, every time that they are getting a new job, any changes in their life situation. They have to update their registry, and they're mandated to go in on regular dates to update the registry. But somebody who's murdered a child, no problem. Once they get out of prison, they're free and clear. They don't. Once they're off, even when they are, as they say, on paper, meaning on parole, once they get off on parole, they have to report to a parole officer, but not with nearly the same level of supervision as a sex offender. Mm. So we're terrified of human sexuality. Murder, not so much. It's just kind of a regular thing. I mean, it's just a murder. So I think you're right. We're fascinated by violence, but we're afraid to own up to the fact that sexuality can be fascinating as well.
Mm. And with sex offense too, it's like, it seems people, like even me, probably back when I first heard about it, or I have a situation with my own family with like my sister getting involved in a teacher that was, he was older, she was younger. It wasn't good. And my idea of him was like, he was a pedophile and blah, blah, blah. And he's evil. And my parents thought that way as well. But then like working with you, it's like, it's funny, like he was in a dysfunctional marriage and probably wasn't getting his needs met, and then finds someone young and has some attraction and starts writing these letters. And not that I approve of that or that I'm happy that happened. I mean, it's a terrible thing to go through, but it's like, I don't know, with sex offense, it seems there's just degrees to it all. Like it could be something like that, or it could be something as minimal as, like you said one time about someone urinating in public and then turning around and becoming arrested for a decent exposure.
Yeah.
And then that's registered as a sex offender.
Right.
So it's like, there's the degrees of what it is. I don't even think the public is aware of.
No, I think generally the generalization is that all sex offenders rape children, and that they're all waiting to grab the nearest child who walks by their house and drag them off into the bushes. And that's just simply not true. In fact, the more you know about this subject, as in any subject, the more calming the knowledge is. And it's a little bit like, I would challenge every listener to consider a scientist like Jonas Salk, who developed the polio vaccine, which was incredibly destructive and hurtful for humanity. And what did he do? Well, he got extra close to it so he could understand it. He put it under the microscope. He spent his days meditating on developing a vaccine. And it went on and on. And that's what every scientist who is researching human health does. Now, we in this podcast are talking about a behavioral health issue and coming to understand that although there may be monstrous acts, there are very few human monsters in this world. Most of us do what we do for very understandable reasons. And I don't like to be self-promoting and when we're talking, but that book I wrote, We're All Like This. Mm-hmm. When we talk about his needs in his marriage, the teacher who had the inappropriate relationship with your sister, those needs are simply unknown to the vast majority of people. When I say vast majority, I mean virtually everyone. When Magellan sailed around the world, they did not know that people actually needed vitamin C. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't know how to plan for prevention of scurvy. And yet, now that we do know, we all take supplemental vitamins, or we eat an extra orange, or we do whatever we do to prevent disease in our lives by monitoring our nutrition. It doesn't matter whether you understand nutrition or not. nutritional deficiencies affect your health. It doesn't matter whether we understand our sexual needs or not, but having deficiencies and getting those needs met does affect us. It affects our happiness, our relationships, our thinking, and our behavior. So the book, We're All Like This, goes over the great majority of human sexual needs apart from orgasm. The book is, I want to encourage parents to get a copy too, because I think it'll give you parents a way of talking, finding your words and finding the sentences to use to begin conversations with your children as they grow older, to begin understanding the people around you in a more truly human way. And it's a very simple read. It's been used as a textbook in colleges, but please don't hold that against me. It's very readable and easily digestible and available, through your bookstore. And I think that would help a lot, because if we knew our sexual needs, then we could begin to do an inventory of those. Am I getting those needs met? And then if I'm in a relationship, confronting my partner, talking about it, figuring out a solution, or short of that, perhaps chalking the whole relationship up to an unsustainable loss, and then moving on with our lives. And I think it also helps single people. I think the book would help single people evaluating a future committed relationship, in that they would begin to have the words to bring up subjects with their prospective partners and talk about things in a way that is truly human, not abstract, not scientific, not clinical, but just truly human. Like an example that I think comes to mind would be talking about sexual play and humor. If you had the perfect sex life, and this is the thought experiment that runs through the book, if you had the perfect sex life with the perfect person who loved you as much as you loved them and was as willing to have sex with you as you were with them, but there was no playfulness or humor in the bedroom or regarding bedroom activities, would that be sustainable for you? If your partner looks at you and says, okay, let's do this.
That's I'm doing it wrong.
Doesn't that sound awful? Well, I think there's just, we all have these needs, but we don't know how to express ourselves. And that's, of course, the egregious failure of our sex education regimen in this country.
And that's where most sex offenders, they're not getting their needs met. So then they go and get them met inappropriately because they're not even able to think clearly about, they don't even have access. They don't even know what's happening, it seems like, because it's like, how do you know if you don't have any access to the information? Yeah,
you would have no way of knowing. And really, if there are those among us who, if we were really honest with ourselves, we would have to admit that we ourselves were never charged with a sexual crime because of luck, not because of virtue.
Yeah.
If the wrong person had made a report, and the police had investigated, and we had spontaneously volunteered, well, yeah, but I thought it was okay, or yeah, but, and fill in whatever the explanation is, then the handcuffs go on and off to court you go.
Yeah. Well, talking to you about this stuff too, it's like you look back at your own life and be like, you get maybe depressed, or you feel like no one's talking to you, or you get needy. And then it's like, hey, anybody comes up to me, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, there's times in your life where you hit these moments, if you're being honest with yourself, and
I think you didn't finish your thought, but I think you were about to say where you get so emotionally needy and lonely that even if the wrong person comes up to you and is flirty, that you end up getting totally involved.
Yeah, for sure.
With someone who, in your right mind, you would never select as a partner for yourself in life. Yeah. And now you're in a committed relationship with someone who's really not compatible with you. And how can you not behave badly at some point in that? And a lot of us men, especially, we don't like to admit failure. So we don't want to say we made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to call our relationship or our marriage a mistake, or the kids following the marriage. And so we, we hang in there. And this is, of all the teachers I've ever talked to who've had inappropriate sexual relations with students, which in many states is a sex crime that is registerable. Mm-hmm. Even if the student is 18 and can give consent legally with any other elderly person like myself, as long as I'm not a school teacher in the district, I'm okay. But if you're a teacher, every one of these teachers, as I said, I can think of one exception. I can think of one guy who got involved with a student and he was not married at the time, but all the others I've known have all been married.
And their just relationship is so unhappy and unsuccessful or what is the reason why they do that then?
Well, the thing about us humans is we're complicated. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of variables, and sometimes it has nothing to do with the quality of our mate. It has to do with our own belief system or our inability to participate in intimate relationships, or our substance abuse that we maintain simply because we have early childhood trauma, and substance abuse is the way we deal with that. There's just any number of problems. And sometimes as I'm thinking about this, the number of people who have intimacy skill deficits where their partner's okay and their marriage is basically okay, but when troubles come, they don't know how to even talk about them in a way that bring the couple closer rather than pushing them apart. So they avoid conflict because they believe, for example, here's an irrational belief, fighting is bad. Mm-hmm. I don't want to fight with my spouse because fighting is bad. But conflict is, I think, a necessary and inevitable part of every intimate relationship, because we're two human beings who are looking at life from two different perspectives. How could we not have conflicts? And this difference of opinion and difference of perspective is one of the strengths of our neurodiversity in any team, including the teamwork of marriage. So, but a lot of us were raised in families where arguing was so destructive and such a negative that we threw the baby out with the bath and blamed arguing instead of blaming what we should have been blaming, which was the abuse.
So then, but what are some of the reasons why these teachers give of going that route of the student thing or the student relationship?
Well, I know you well enough to know, for example, anytime a beautiful woman of any age is flirty or complimentary, paying me attention, there's this ridiculous inner 13-year-old who gets giddy with delight. And I feel flattered. Yeah. And I'm flattered by the attention and all the rest. And you see this in spy movies. I love that expression, the honey trap. But in spy movies, generally that's all it takes is a beautiful woman paying attention to the idiot who holds the nuclear code in his briefcase. And sure, I'll give you everything if you're going to pay attention to me. And it's the same way with the rest of us. But if you're managing your sexuality intelligently, you accept, I feel very flattered and I'm really enjoying this. And this is great. And it's also very understandable. And it's also no call to action. No action is required. Yeah. I don't have to buy her a drink. I don't have to give her the nuclear codes. I don't have to deceive myself by thinking, she must be in love with me because I'm so marvelous. Or perhaps if she doesn't have daddy issues, maybe in my case, she has granddaddy issues. And no, I don't have to conclude any of that. I can just enjoy it for whatever it is and then let go of it, because for those of us who are married, happily, as in my case, the idea is, well, it's pleasant. She's, pleasant to look at, as they call her, eye candy. I enjoy the view, but I have this amazing woman at home who loves and adores me and treats me like a god. And so I want to have nothing to do with any behavior that's going to put that at risk.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to hurt my wife's feelings or alienate her in any way. I don't want any drama. I certainly don't want some 22-year-old good-looking drunk banging on my door at 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's kind of a catch and release program. I mean, even if you're a teacher, let's say, and you like, do you know the movie Mr. Holland's Opus?
Yeah, I haven't, with Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen that.
I didn't even think you were that old that you would have seen that. Oh my God.
Yeah. It came out in the 90s, right?
I guess it did. But whatever date it came in, I thought it was a reasonable rollout of a plot where a guy could get sideways with his own sexuality, being so flattered and also so stupid over the attention of a young woman. He obviously had a crush on his student.
Mm-hmm.
He was enjoying working with her, but because he was incapable of enjoying the kind of genuine emotional intimacy and vulnerability with his wife, and it would have been the same had he married any other woman, he ends up feeling all these feelings and feels so connected to this person he's never really connected with. So he's just, it's a nice, they should probably show that at teacher trainings, because and go over it, because it would be a good one to talk through.
So that they're at home, though, they're not getting something met.
Yeah. In some
way.
Yeah. And in the case of the one individual I can think of who was single, there was no at home. I mean, he went home to an apartment by himself, and that was the end of that. He was lonely and needy. But what he was neglecting in his own life was developing a network of supportive people in his life, both friends and possible dating partners. And I have people asking me how to do that all the time, and I always want to caution them on, please, no dating apps. Please don't use dating apps. Don't use the internet for that. But in virtually every community, there are activities to get involved with, groups, causes to become a part of. And by doing that, we kind of replicate what used to happen in high school. You'd be sitting in your English class in, say, 9th, 10th grade, and getting a feel for all the people around you. And you'd identify a few of the people you didn't want to be around, and a few intriguing people you'd be open to getting to know better. And most of the men I've worked with, and indeed I would say most men in our society today, don't do that. We're very focused on work, and but not very focused on mindfully and intelligently developing a social network of friends and, as I say, romantic interests. Mm-hmm. So I think if we did that mindfully, we would have a lot of choices. There'd be a lot of potential partners to date. And nowadays, with thankfully things easing up a bit, I think in terms of social pressures, I think women are free to invite men out for a cup of coffee just because she'd like to get to know him better. Mm-hmm. And then, following that cup of coffee, if he's not a total disappointment, to suggest maybe we should, go out for breakfast, or we should do something else together. I just think people seem to have lost the art of dating and the art of, use a risky phrase here, but it's legit social intercourse, mm-hmm. where we are involved with and have conversations with others that are meaningful and that are truly enjoyable. So, most of my single clients who end up with sex crimes, they're just very lonely, because they don't, the married guys at least have their friends, but sadly their friends are just the husbands of his wife's friends. And so, in the event of a divorce, she usually gets to keep all the friends and the property settlement, and he ends up with nobody. So there he is, single and alone, feeling depressed, all by himself. And that's time, I think, for a critical incident debriefing. If you don't want to commit a sex crime, or you don't want to be sued for sexual harassment, you might want to take a minute to do an inventory of just Do you really have any friends? And figure out how to make some friends. And by friends, I mean men who help you become a better man, not just guys who are willing to go have a drink, but something beyond that. And that doesn't happen just overnight. You have to build that with men.
Yeah.
And then over time, if you continue to press on, you will be meeting men and women who are enjoyable and compatible, and, or as I like to say, belong to your tribe and have enough in common with you that you can have an enjoyable exchange. And as that group grows, quite naturally, the people who like you are going to want to introduce you to women they think you would like. And it's a very organic thing as opposed to what the internet offers, where we're swiping right or left based on a photograph and a very brief, like 2 lines of a biography, something besides liking long walks under the moonlight. It's just not enough. You really need to get to know people, I think. We don't do that very well.
Yeah. So it's a lot of these guys, or men or women, who do commit these crimes, they're lacking in social skills and feeling lonely and isolated and just not really sure how to have genuine connection with normal adults. Is that?
Yeah, a simple way to take inventory for the people who are listening, and not just for yourself, but looking at your friends or your family, looking at your own children. There are 3 things a man has to figure out in order to be happy. And this is from Alfred Adler from about 100 years ago. He said that it was career, friendship, and love. And I say career not because women don't have careers or enjoy their careers, but for men, so much of our self-esteem is based on what we do, our actions. And without a career, and career starts very young. It starts when you're in school. That's the beginning of your career as a young person.
Like you're a career student?
Yeah. Well, when you're in like 6th grade, that's the beginning of your career, right? You're not going to go forward if in a complicated, complex culture like ours, if you don't have an education. And we know that that's true demographically. There may be outliers out there who are such geniuses that they never went to school, but look at him now. He's a billionaire. Well, okay, but that's not the path that any of us would recommend as a regular practice to the children of the world. So career, followed by friendship, which usually friendship is where we begin learning our social skills, identifying somebody we would like to have as a friend, and we find out he steals toys. So we made a mistake, and then we're more careful, a little more savvy in the future. And then love. And love starts this is one of the reasons I'm writing a book with a new theory of sexual development. Freud was just a wonderful guy with a lot of great ideas, but he got this theory of human sexual development very wrong. People fall in love at very young ages, I should say. And part of that is because they're sexual beings. So boys are falling in love with teachers in 3rd grade, or with girls in their classroom, and they do it before 3rd grade. I just picked that arbitrarily, and that's a normal and wonderful part of childhood development. But if we can't figure that out and figure out how to have conversations, a typical client in my office this would be probably 15-20% of my clients have never gone up to a woman and said, Susan, I really liked what you had to say. I'd like to buy you a cup of coffee so we could talk about this some more if you're open. They've never invited a woman out.
Yeah.
And how are you ever going to get your sexual needs met if you can't even invite a woman out for a conversation?
Because they're going to invite me out for the cup of coffee.
Yeah. Or I'm waiting for a miracle to happen because, surely something will develop. I mean, lightning will strike.
So they're shy. They're shy and maybe socially awkward or something like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Shy and inexperienced. Some of them pathologically so, with something called avoidant personality disorder. But there are other reasons why people are shy and why other people have no experience. Sometimes it's they lived in a very sheltered home environment I would say pathologically sheltered, where it was discouraged. They were discouraged from asking girls out or doing anything with even their friends. I had one client who was just a wonderful guy, and I remember him very fondly, but he was, I mean, this is going to sound unbelievable to some, but it's true. He was put on a curfew, or basically house arrest, by his stepfather for over a year one time during his vital developmental years. And that meant he had to come straight home from school. He couldn't talk to anybody. He couldn't go anywhere. And the same with his weekends. He couldn't invite anybody over. And it was, I mean, gee, if you're trying to help Stephen Ng earn more money by counseling sex offenders, I just want every parent listening to this to please do that, because you will raise some really messed up adults who will go on to commit sex crimes. And just give them my card.
So you say too, like in a Psychology Today article, I wrote down a quote here. You said, when I ask sex offenders the question, what would you like to get out of therapy? The most common response over decades is, I'd like to know how this happened.
Right.
So
yeah, they're as mystified as anybody. I don't know why I did what I did. Because they know, they have a knowingness inside their heart that they're decent, that they're nice guys, that they know they have no intention to harm anyone.
Yeah.
And yet there they are. And sometimes the harm is debatable, because although prosecutors love throwing around the term predator, it's really hard for me to see how in a case involving just some guy looking at pictures of underage girls or boys, that he has somehow victimized them by looking at the pictures. So I don't really think that they are predatory. I think sex offenders tend to be, once you get to know them, in general, they're far more pathetic than they are predatory. They're far more pitiable than they are predatory. And they are confused. They really don't know. And yet they do things to try to help themselves. You know, one individual, he came out of prison after 20 plus years, and he told me that, God, he hadn't known anything about relationships when he went in, but my God, he'd learned some things, man, and he really knew, how to do it now and what women were looking for. And I wanted to know what women are looking for, because I didn't know either. So I said, so what did you do? He said, oh, I read every romance book I could lay my hands on. And it was one of those wah, wah, wah moments in my life. I thought, you poor bastard. Because those themselves are the fantasies, those are the written fantasies of a certain group of women who enjoy, and they are sexual fantasies, because it's about finding that special someone and sharing your life with them, and the travails and all you have to go through to find that person, and the magical moments or the serendipity that has to occur before you can meet that person and eventually marry them. And for my clients, that would be sort of the ultimate in self-deception, to go from the locker room wisdom of the other guys egging them on to do something stupid, to the romance novel nonsense that they are thinking, oh, that's real intimacy. That's how you do intimacy, because they conflate intimacy with romance when they are two completely different subjects, which is why we have different words to describe them.
Yeah. You also got to hit the gym pretty hard and grow your hair out. I feel like if you want to be on the cover of some of those.
Like Fabio.
Yeah. Like Fabio, and have that image.
Well, for my incel clients, of which I have a growing number, and these are guys who are involuntarily celibate and generally masturbating a lot, in their home with online porn, and they're very dependent on that. And because of systematic desensitization to porn, over time, they have to look for something more exotic, more unusual, maybe something forbidden to kind of juice it up a little bit just before the FBI knocks on the door. And for them, I think it's impossible. They know it's impossible for them to ever have a woman in their life. at least a woman they would want to be with, because they don't have a six-pack. They don't have a six-figure income. They're not over 6 feet tall. They're not, to use a modern image, they're not the Jack Reachers of the world who are just pounding sense into criminals' heads. They are generally, in my experience, incels tend to be very sensitive, very nice guys who are quite interesting in and of themselves, but they're sort of like that old fable about the ugly duckling. And they themselves are trying so hard to be ugly ducklings, when actually, for the right woman, they would be the perfect swan. They're sensitive, they're altruistic, they're kind, but they absolutely don't believe any women are interested in that those qualities because of women's behavior on the internet when they're swiping left and right. One of them quoted a statistic, which I'm not going to get right, but it was something to the effect of 90% of women are swiping the right direction on 5% of the photographs.
Yeah.
And I can believe that something like that is true because
guys are probably the complete opposite.
No, I think guys are the same way, right? Because
I think they're swiping. Like I saw like one time, I remember a story where the one girl's like, yeah, this guy brought out his phone and he just didn't even look at him. It just, everything was right.
Oh, he was accepting everybody?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, just like anyone who's going to talk to me, anyone who's going to match, I don't care.
Well, there's a lot of truth to that as well. Although I know some men who are really picky on that issue, but the point being, if all a woman is presented with is an image, then that's all she has to make her judgment on. To find out if a man is truly kind and capable of intelligent conversation, to find out if a man is interesting and has interests that are compatible, that takes a minute. Doesn't take an hour, but it takes a little bit of time to actually converse with somebody.
Yeah.
And a lot of people nowadays are simply not doing that.
What I was going to say, would you say then with all this stuff, it seems like, so sexuality, we're all born with it. It's flowing through us, right? It's like an energy. Would you call it that?
I think it has to be that way. I mean, it's what's kept our species going for the last million years. So whether in peacetime or war, whether it's appropriate or it's inappropriate, whether we're with the person of the proper color according to the law of the land at the time, whether it's South Africa or the United States during the time we had those laws, I think we are willing to have sex under just really the most adverse conditions. So yeah, it's a very powerful drive.
So then the sex offenders, then they're obviously, I mean, the whole thing of managing sexuality intelligently is to not almost become a sex offender. It's to not cheat in your relationships. It's to like have a good, not to go with the person who's flirting with you and leave your relationship just because some beautiful woman wants to maybe go home with you or whatever the situation may be. But and if you, like that's what you've learned from the sex offenders, I guess. It's like it seems like they're not getting their needs met, like their sexual needs, which people don't know about because they haven't read the book. And that
It all depends on my book. If you haven't read my book, you're in deep trouble.
But there's something with the discomfort that they're feeling, it seems like.
And they don't know what their options are, or if they do have an inkling about their options, they're afraid of following up on their options. And when we use that phrase, not getting their needs met, I think so many people immediately blame their partner or their last partner or somebody else. But if I have needs, whose responsibility is it for me to make sure my needs are met? It's mine, of course. If I'm not getting enough vitamin C, I'm not getting enough exercise, I'm not getting enough sleep, those are my problems. And it's the same with sexuality, which for me, sexuality doesn't start with intercourse. It doesn't start in the bedroom. it really starts with me just accepting myself as a sexual being and engaging in sexual behaviors that are totally socially acceptable, like what we used to call girl watching. Mm-hmm. For me to be able to look and enjoy at attractive potential partners or even attractive individuals who are never going to be partners, like people in a movie or a TV show, it's really okay for me to look at that, to give myself permission to think about it, and then to also query myself. Well, so what else would I be looking for? Obviously, I'm interested in a certain kind of look, but or a wide range of looks, whatever the case may be. But what else would I need to have a successful relationship? And there's no sex education program in this world that teaches what else is needed to have a successful relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the main thing with what sex offenders can teach us is that we are failing as a society. I mean, that's what it seems. I mean, we have a it's like a big discomfort around sex. And then as far as education goes, we're not educating people properly to even understand what's happening inside their bodies. I mean, to know that sexuality is this thing, like the way that you put it, it's like it's a powerful force within us, or however you've said it. And
I'd call it a force of nature. When a boy hitting puberty over the space of 3 months has a 17-fold increase in testosterone at the height of his immaturity sexually, I think that's it's really a harsh and cruel thing to not inform him of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To not explain to him that his feelings are normal and that his sexual thoughts or his desire for sexual pleasurable touch through masturbation is to not teach him that that's normal. And I know their heads exploding across America as people are listening to this, but the statistic, I think it's still true. 95% of all people masturbate. Mm-hmm. The remaining 5% are liars.
Yeah, that's the.
So wouldn't it be great if sexuality includes mate selection. Mm-hmm. And yeah, as a boy in 3rd grade or 4th grade, I might have a crush on my teacher. But then to have a parent or an older person who can talk me through that, and be affirming and kind, and talk about what's good about that, and then even just to gently bring up the question. So, do you think any chance Miss Henderson, that was one of mine, that she's going to be waiting for you till you're grown up, and that she won't date anybody? She won't. Well, I hope she doesn't. But do you think there's really any chance that's actually okay? And a lot of times you can just let go. You don't have to crush the little guy's heart and say, no, she's going to be dating other people. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to be dating her myself based on our conversation if she's that good looking. But I think kids in development, they learn very early to shut up, to keep their sexual truths to themselves, because they will be mocked, humiliated, and even abused if they do share who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard. We need to be vulnerable to get the information of what's going on with our children, or as a child, I need to be vulnerable. But I'm surrounded by a fairly hostile environment that judges me and mocks me for my sexuality, even if it's a perfectly heteronormative sexuality. It's uncomfortable. I can't tell you how many guys I've got with histories of early childhood trauma from their families for mocking them, and that set them up for an attraction to younger and younger girls. Like for the 4th grader to find that the 1st grade girls are much nicer than the 4th grade girls who mocked him and humiliated him because he was crushing on one of theirs.
Man. Yeah, and I also think like another thing that I talked to you about before, it's like I think sex offenders teach us that we all have the ability to become them if we do not manage this part of our lives intelligently. And I've seen it just with in a lot of situations. And it's something that through learning through their mistakes and their mishaps, I think a lot of the stuff that you've created with this relationship technology is ways to become aware of things so that you get your needs met, as you say, honorably and legally. So,
yeah. And I've had a number of acquaintances who are lawyers because of the nature of my practice. And I do a lot of forensic work as well as regular counseling. But even the lawyers I've talked to have confided in me that their own older children have, even hearing the stories from their dads about sexual criminality, all the horror stories, and being given the yellow caution flags on, you can do this, but don't ever do that. All that kind of information. It isn't enough. It just isn't enough. I mean, this is a part of our lives that is so subject to emotional influences that the lessons need to be repeated over and over and over again, not in a hounding, nagging sort of a way, but just as a playful and enjoyable conversation in the home. And I'm going to just leave the listening audience with this hint. One of the best newspapers in the country has as part of its heading all the news that's fit to print. And I love that, because if it's in the newspaper, then, gee, I can't be faulted for sharing it with my children. And if you find anything in your hometown newspaper or one of the big national newspapers that involves a story about sexuality of any kind, whether it's sex education or teenager movie-oriented movies, or maybe it is a crime story, I think sharing one story per week with your children would guarantee that you'd have about 52 wonderful conversations a year on this subject. And that these conversations would start off with, would you listen to this? And you read the appropriate part of the story, and you sit back, what do you think of that? And your kids may be too uncomfortable to have any kind of thoughts, or that may be the moment where they say, well, what is a pedophile, Dad? Mm-hmm. Or what does that mean, lewdness with a minor? Or what does that mean, that they were talking about something inappropriate at school, mm-hmm. or that the priest was arrested for that? What does that all mean? And if it goes no further than that, that's a win. But if it doesn't even get that far, it's a win, because we're systematically desensitizing our children to the notion that sexual topics are fit for the breakfast table. They're fit for us to discuss. Mm-hmm. That we as a family can safely and comfortably talk about sexuality, and that it's a great way for us to learn and to pick up new information that we're not going to pick up anywhere else. If you had 50 of those conversations a year over a 10-year period, that's going to really help kids a lot.
And sex offenders, if they do commit a sex offense after that, they would know how it happened, because they've had those discussions.
Probably, so. I mean, it's not like, if I know a lot about a lot, it's not mm-hmm. like I'm not going to make a mistake. I still can make mistakes. Marriage and family therapists mm-hmm. make mistakes all the time, and they get divorced all the time, just like other people. But I had a new client the other day, and she was just such a heroine of good sense. She did something I thought that was remarkable, and I assume that there are thousands like her out there in America. She got married in her first marriage to someone who abused her, and took 6 months to examine the problem, to see if he would change, to confront him. And then she was out. She was done. Wow. And moved on with her life. I wish that all of my children could do that. I hope they could all do that, because unresolved abusive behavior is not likely to get better. And that too is part of mate selection and building a home life and a sexual life that is worth having.
Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap up there. And to end, we have a listener question. And if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. And here's this week's question. I'm a private person and my wife is an open book with information about our life. Where is the line? Where is the line between knowing it's wrong to tell her who she can talk to and what she can say, and her complaining to her sister, her mom, and her girlfriends, which for me feels like a significant betrayal?
Ooh, I do kind of wonder. This is something that kind of stumps me, not knowing what he's complaining about. Because, okay, overall, I would say if I lived through it, I have the right to talk about it. So if it embarrasses my mother to talk about that I talk about her drinking, that's too bad. That's my life story now. And I have a right to talk about that, that she was a drunk when I was growing up. If my father or stepfather was physically abusive, yeah, I have a right to talk about that and to not guard my tongue and make sure he's never, subject to any kind of disapproval from others. That's irrelevant. But at the same time, in an intimate relationship, we all have very intimate disclosures. And if I confess to my wife that, no, this is not true, that even if it were, it wouldn't be a bad thing. But let's say I wanted to do something odd in the bedroom, odd by general standards. And it involved parachutes and a small audience. And my wife refused or complied with my request, but she made a point of telling everybody in her family about that. I would feel some sense of betrayal. And I think because there's this presumption that we're going to have some privacy. So, and in particular, my sharing my innermost sexual thoughts. If, one of the things I always encourage married people to do with one another, people living together in some kind of committed relationship, I always encourage them to strive for the kind of relationship where they can comfortably share their sexual thoughts, including that they met somebody attractive and they found them very attractive and what they found attractive about them and that sort of thing. And, or to talk about their past, what worked for them or what was horribly not working for them in their past relationship. And I think that that's a wonderful thing to share that kind of intimacy because it really helps us to build a real closeness. I get to understand her or she gets to understand me in a way that otherwise we wouldn't. But that old phrase from the New Testament where Christ says, cast not your pearls before swine. To me, it means that we're supposed to be discerning and discriminating when it comes to who we're going to share with. And there's this, I think, implied warranty in my marriage that I shouldn't have to ask if I tell my wife something personal about myself, that she's not going to go tell her mother, her sisters, and all the other members of her family. And if she wanted to at least run it by me and see how I feel about that. So guarding one another's privacy, I think that's also legit.
Yeah.
So the things that aren't legit would be, I don't need to cover for people who've been abusive or crazy, in their behavior with me. So,
so would you say that just having a conversation around privacy and what you're comfortable as a couple sharing would be something that they could do to?
Yeah, this brings up yet a tertiary issue. There's her issues, there's his discomfort with the disclosures, but there's also this issue around, well, how is it that he grew up to become a man who's so incompetent at setting boundaries and defending his boundaries? Because for me, whether the client is male or female isn't the issue, but to be competent as an adult means I've got to be able to confront people who violate my confidences. And I've got to be able to set boundaries with these people. Especially, I'm not talking about the casual person out there or the one-off, the highway patrolman who's pulled me over for drunk driving. I'm not talking about his guarding my privacy, but I'm talking about people close to me who should know better. And then if they can't keep the commitments to maintain my confidentiality, my privacy, to me, that's a deal breaker. I would feel that strongly about that. I want I want to be able to have the comfort and confidence that we can discuss intimate things without that becoming general knowledge in the community.
Yeah. So then if it's something where this person's wife is unwilling to give that up and this person is a private person, then they have a decision to make.
They have a decision to make, and therapy going forward for that individual man in this case, I think means he's got to take a look at himself in the mirror and talk to his therapist about, how do I set boundaries like this? And do I have the right to do that? And how would I do it in the first place? And then what do I do if she doesn't respect my boundaries, or she's unwilling to commit to respecting those boundaries, or she says she is committed, but she can't keep a commitment to save her life? Yeah. So I think for me, that would mean I really want to know like how I'm supposed to behave. And this is a harder conversation really, because it's, it's like me, I almost always have 20/20 vision about the flaws in other people. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the man in the mirror, I don't have nearly the same kind of clarity. Mm-hmm. And I need to start with taking a look at me. How is it I got myself into this situation? Yeah. Because it's not all on her. How did I ever get into a marriage where this is the norm? Yeah. Where this is okay?
Yeah, there's probably some signs early on that you neglect because of neediness and not managing your sexuality intelligently.
Kind of, and so the serpent ends up swallowing his tail, and the conversation comes back to where we started. It's so true. Mm-hmm. It's all of the cloth, right? The management of my sexuality intelligently. It isn't like we can talk about it in terms of compartments, but it all runs together. Yeah. Very much like everything else that's truly human, because we have these multiple dimensions, my intellectual being, my emotional being, my sexual being, but they're all inseparable from all the other parts. Yeah. So I got to get it all.
Just got to get those parts working together in a way that's healthy.
Thanks, Jason. This was great.
All right. Thanks, Steve.